The last time I saw Hussein, he was in a really, really bad shape. Um, I went there with my father, Mortaza, my brother, Arman, and they had brought in a bed from hospice. And so we sat there, we talked a little bit, despite him being in so much pain. And we all knew that this was the last, few days of his life. And so I waited for everyone to leave that particular space of the house so I could just kiss his hand or kiss his feet. And so the moment I bent over to kiss his feet, all of a sudden from nowhere he had all this energy and mobility, and he just jerked his body away. And he frowned, and I suppose it was his way to reprimand what I was going to do. None of us know where he was buried, or where he is buried. Yeah. From his perspective, my behavior was not something I should have done, from his perspective. From my perspective, it was the only thing I could have done, really. So what should we talk about, if anything? Really? Alexis?
Maybe it's a little bit like your story about Hussein, that we had an idea of how to worship something, someone, but it seems like so much of what we were worshiping really lives in our own imagination, and it becomes an obstacle.
It becomes an obstacle?
You can, because we make assumptions. I'm not speaking about you, but the question I have is, you have these ideas of how you ought to be, how to act, and what is right, and that in trying to do what is right, you can create this framework of obstacles, shoulds and must and ought, and that kind of live in the imagination. was wondering if you could talk about that a bit.
Can you maybe ask your question again?
When we love something, love someone, we create obstacles for ourselves by imagining what it is to engage in the act of loving and loving that thing. Instead of worshipping the thing, whatever it is that we set to worship, we worship imaginings, or we get attached to. I'm not doing any better, I'm sorry.
I can't claim to understand your question. Yeah, it's like finding some scrolls in a cave somewhere and parts of it have been destroyed. And so you try to piece together, you know, all the broken and missing parts to kind of figure out what the scroll is all about. So when you read the Gospel of Mary or you read the Gospel of Judas, all of a sudden it jumps from page 25 to 900, you know, because so many pages are missing. And you have no idea what those missing pages are saying. But, you know, page 1 says, for example, Judas is a wonderful disciple. And all of a sudden it jumps to page 900 and Jesus says, "You've been my best disciple." Now it may be that for 800 pages Jesus was saying all these nasty things about Judas, but it's because the pages are missing. The assumption is, well, he was really a loved disciple of Jesus. And I say that only because when I hear your question, and it not be you, it's probably mostly me, that I'm just missing so many elements in your question that I can only maybe respond to the things that I get from it. You know, I'll tell you 2 stories. Maybe 3 stories. I remember Chris. Remember our friend Chris, who's at Princeton? He had once in class asked if Carlos Castaneda, he's written like 20 books or so about his experience with Don Juan, if his books were basically the outcome of his imagination. He just sat somewhere. It was the 1960s. There was this movement taking place in the American culture and the American psyche. And some people argue that because he was so imaginative, and he was an anthropologist, and he had a spiritual bent, kind of like the woman who goes somewhere and writes 20 volumes of Harry Potter. Castaneda did the same thing. And so Chris asked if it's valuable for us to read his writing because it may all be fiction. You know, when you consider what life does to us, you go to school and you have this fantasy in your head that once you get your bachelor's, your master's, your PhD, something great is waiting for you. And then you get your diploma, and all of a sudden something about it just fizzles out. That your fantasy gets crushed by the reality that yes, you have a PhD, yes, you have some power, yes, you made some sacrifices, but now you're very poor in the sense that you now have to apply for a job. There's an excitement in that, and I suppose there is some excitement in going to interviews and hopefully getting a job, and there's a good amount of excitement in getting an offer. And very much like being given a diploma, there comes a point where you dread going to work. And ultimately, everything turns out to be like what the Buddha said some 3,000 years ago. There is an excitement with every birth of anything. It's like this brand new life that just breathes life into a life that's going nowhere. And then something happens to this life. It slowly begins to suffocate. I don't know why. Maybe it's just part of the human experience, the human psyche. You just get bored of things. And there comes a point where the very thing that gave you so much life now suffocates you. It's dead to you. You don't want to be around it. You don't want to have it in your life. But it's there. There isn't much you can do. And that's really what all of life is. You know, things are born, there's excitement, you get tired of them, they sicken you. And then you pray that this thing is just removed from your exterior life as well as all the memories you have of it. It no longer serves any purpose, it's like dead. And all of a sudden comes Harry Potter. All of a sudden comes Castaneda. I don't really care if he ever met a Don Juan. I don't care if Don Juan was a true character. I don't care if Don Juan was a magician. I don't care if Don Juan knew everything there is to know about peyote. All I know is that I come home and it's dreadful because of what life does to me on a daily basis. It sucks the life out of me. And on my drive home, I look forward to going to my study, grabbing one of his books, sitting down with a nice cup of coffee and just reading it. And it takes me to places that ordinary life can't take me. Am I worshipping the wrong thing? Am I in love with someone's imagination? Someone who just made up something from thin air? It may be all true, but I don't really care. Regardless of what a charlatan, perhaps, Don Juan, or Carlos Castaneda, or Gurdjieff may be, all these four characters, the truth is they do something to my psyche. Maybe it's because of history that has been advertised to me that Gurdjieff was a real teacher, Bhai Sahib was a real teacher. Maybe it's the power of advertisement. But regardless, I look at the book In Search of the Miraculous, or Daughter of Fire, or the teachings of Don Juan, or the dialogues of Plato, or the Bible, or the Quran, or Dhammapada, whatever the case may be. And I impose a fantasy into these things, a fantasy that makes me believe in something, some magical realm. I think it's valuable, you know. It doesn't really matter if you're worshipping the real thing or you're worshipping figments of your own imaginations, your own creation. The end result is you're worshipping. And the thing with all kinds of worship is whether you worship God or you worship a man or a woman or you worship a child because you're the mother, all kinds of worship remove your pride to some extent. All kinds of worship create a good amount of humility. All kinds of worship make you passive. They demand that you make sacrifices, and you do so willingly, you know. I usually don't share these things, but I remember many decades ago, one night I got home and I'm just in a really, really bad shape. I turn off the lights, I get into a fetal position, and I kind of just break down a little bit, you know. Out of exhaustion, I fall asleep, and I have a dream, and it was a beautiful dream. And I didn't much care about what Krishnamurti would say about dreams and those things, that, Muslims dream about Muhammad, and Christians dream about Jesus, and Hindus dream about Krishna. Krishnamurti had no power at that point in my life. And I awoke from the dream. It's like I had been resurrected from the dead. I was filled with life. I was happy. I felt as if I was connected to something. And time passes, and the intensity of the experience fades. And then I say to myself, maybe tonight when I go home, I should get myself into a fetal position again and coerce, manipulate, play with my own psyche so I could break down and then fall asleep on the floor. And maybe I'll have the dream again, or maybe something more or less intense. And it didn't work. But I think my intentions, despite being manipulative, my intentions were really, really good. Without really knowing what I was saying to myself, perhaps, or to the universe, was that life has nothing to offer me. The world is a huge place, and it's a huge toy store. But I lock myself in my room because nothing out there excites or interests me. And I am willing to play all sorts of ridiculous games on my psyche for an experience that this world can't give me. Was I worshipping it? Absolutely. Had it come to me, would I awake from it and say it was the creation of my own imagination or mind? Maybe Krishnamurti would, come in from some corner of my psyche and say, Amir, you played the trick on yourself and it worked. But the truth is, whether it was my own creation or whether it was given to me as a blessing of sorts, if you believe in those things, these experiences do give me wings. And they get me in touch with something that just everyday, ordinary life can't give me. I am tempted to say things about marriage, but I won't. You know, in really early in my life, I ran into this young woman and I fell in love with her. And she fell in love with me. And it's the young woman who had MS. I didn't care about the disease, and I didn't care because I didn't really know much about it. And the other aspect of not caring was that, you know, love is an amazing emotion. It really, really blinds you. You are so much into the present that the devastation that's waiting to impose itself upon you in the future, you don't think about it. You have this ridiculous and stupid courage that you say, the way I feel about this person is so wonderful that I can conquer anything, you know. So what had happened was that a few times I went to the car wash rather late, you know, because I had to drive from San Francisco to Roseville. After a while, my parents just knew that something was up, you know, and eventually I told them that yes, I met this person, and they were very happy for me. On one occasion, my mom was just relentless, you know, she wanted to know why I was late all the time. And then I didn't know what else to say except to say we had gone to the hospital. She had to be examined for this particular disease. My mom didn't know what this disease was either. So she calls her nephew's wife, Stephanie. She says, "What is MS, Stephanie?" And they're on the phone for the next hour and a half. And my mom is like in the kitchen crying. I say, "Mom, what's going on?" Now, see, I'm in love. I am worshipping this woman. I'm worshipping this emotion. I'm worshipping the future I will have with this woman. I'm just in a state of worship, you know. And I don't care if I have to sacrifice Ishmael or Isaac. You know, I've been waiting for God to show his face, and finally he does. And he's asking me a very, very tiny thing. Sacrifice your son. Not a problem. Sacrifice, you know, your future for this emotion, this love, this narrative that you've created. It's not a problem. When my mom calmed down a little bit, she looks at me and all of a sudden she screams, "You can't do this. I'm not going to let you do this." "Mom, you know, I'm a grown man. You can't tell me what to do. There's nothing grown up about you," she says to me. And you know how you jackhammer a cement? You don't really see the cracks initially, but as the jackhammer keeps hammering away little by little, you see the cracks. And then this piece of concrete shatters into pieces. Every single day, maybe 5, 10, 15, 20 times she would call, and I was at the car wash. She would scream, she would yell, she would cry. And you know, when you're not a parent, you don't really understand these things. It always reminds me of Baba Tahir's poem. گلی که خم بدادم پیچ تابش ز آب دیدگونم دادم آبش به درگاه الهی کی روابی گل از ما دیگری گیره گلابش. That this is a kid I raised with the blood of my heart and the tears of my eyes. That's how I protected this kid. And that's how all parents do. really raise and protect their kids with their time, with all the things they have to sacrifice, put their life on pause. And once you put your life on pause, eventually you just forget, all the things you wanted to be, all the things you wanted to do. I mean, ask any parent. And there comes this breaking point where they just give up on their hopes because life is just demanding. You wanted to be a Socrates, but that's out the window. You wanted to be a philosopher, you wanted to do this, you wanted to do that, but nothing works anymore. And what she was basically telling me, my mom, is that I'm not going to give you freely to this disease. You came out of me, and I will do whatever I can to make sure that your relationship gets messed up so you could come back home. And you could perhaps find yourself a different companion or no companion at all. Her relentless jackhammering of my psyche, after a while, cracks began to appear. And now I had two things to worship. I love my parents. I love this woman. And the conflict began to grow. And it grew more and more and more and more until every morning I would wake up angry, not knowing which direction to go. My mom would say, well, if you want to get married, you will no longer be my son. That young woman would say, if you get married, you can never see your parents. Do you see? And so all of a sudden, what happens is you realize that whatever emotion you had towards this woman, whatever emotions you had towards your parents, and whatever emotions and perspectives you had about your own self, they're all getting destroyed. And they're getting destroyed by the realities of life. As long as those realities don't hit your imagination, you'll be fine. You'll be in a continuous state of worship. You will continue to love. You know, but the moment life happens, little by little, however intense you may have felt, it's just going to go away. You know, it's something David and I used to talk about. We used to go to coffee shops and sometimes, this Persian place to eat some food, and we stay there for like 5-6 hours. David worked with some really, really interesting people, and I'm sure he fell in love with one or two of them. I had fallen in love with Hussein, and I think your first real teacher eventually, you may work with other teachers, and eventually you will go back to the very first person you worked with, who kind of just opened your eyes a little. It's kind of like reading the Altar of Fire. That once in a while, life hands you this beautiful book, and you're ready for the book. And the book gives you wings. And then you realize you're getting to the end of the book, so instead of reading 10 pages a day, you read 2 pages a day, because you don't want the book to end. Because once the book ends, the fantasies will go away. You will not know what to do with your days, once the book ends. And the book ends. You finish the book. And you want to reread the book only to realize you know exactly how it's going to unfold, and it's no longer that interesting. And you go to the library, or you go to some bookstore, and you comb through the aisles, and you comb through the books because you want something similar. But you can't find anything. And you sit back and you say, how could it be? I have all these books in my house. Once in a while, I wake up early in the morning and I just go through the books. I just want to find something that'll give me wings. And you realize this is just ink and paper. There are no books. Nothing can come close to Daughter of Fire. I mean, sure, they can have a paragraph or two here and there, but nothing glues you to your seat the way the dialogues did, the way Thusbach Zarathustra did, the day Daughter of Fire did. And you realize that, well, you'd rather just get rid of all these books because they serve no purpose. What happens is that your imagination never comes to life. There is nothing to worship. There is nothing to love. Everything is ordinary. Everything is just really just fluff. I don't know what you mean by obstacle. If by obstacle you mean something that clips the wings of your ability to worship, and little by little you kind of descend and you begin to walk instead of to fly. Once you've been contaminated, it's finished. Early on in my relationship with Hussein, because of the way I felt about him, because of the way I saw him, people would tell me things about him. That the reason why he came to the US was because of ABCD. The way he got his visa to come to the US was EFGH. But my feelings towards Hussein was so intense that it didn't matter what people said. It didn't impact me. It didn't impact my image of him, my feeling towards him. So I continued to ascend. I continued to worship him. What became an obstacle was Krishnamurti. I began to read Krishnamurti. He has a lot of nice things to say, but you have to read Krishnamurti at the right time in your intellectual maturity. Because if you read Krishnamurti at the wrong time, it's like telling your father to let go of the bike. And you're only 2, and it's your first time. And Krishnamurti can really do some serious damage. So what happened was that when I would go to his house and I would sit and listen, in the back of my head, Krishnamurti was playing. He was whispering into my ears. And then Gurdjieff. And what would happen is I would compare Krishnamurti to Hussein, or Hussein to Krishnamurti, or Hussein to Gurdjieff, or Hussein to Rumi. And I would walk away feeling that Hussein would always fall short. He missed this particular point, and he missed that particular point. Now, when you're young, and when you're a novice, and when you're curious, in all the wrong ways, and at all the wrong times, you don't really see the damage, and you don't really understand the consequences. There came a point where you realize that you go to a Hussein house, but you can't feel anything. There is nothing to worship. He doesn't, and you feel as if he doesn't know what he's talking about. And this, really, I suppose, long rant really is, if there is anything you worship, there's always pros and cons to these things, but continue to worship it, because once it goes away, it's going to be such a difficult thing for you, for any one of us, to find something that we can worship again. And as you get older, and as you gain more experience, and as life injects more contaminants inside you, it becomes more and more and more difficult. It's like Your first marriage, you walk in with a lot of hope, and then it gets crushed. Your second marriage, you still have hope, but it's not as strong. Your third marriage, fourth marriage, fifth marriage, you're just waiting for the disaster to happen, you know. You're just, whatever you touch is like a ticking bomb. You know, one of the nice things about love, you really don't see the other person as flesh, as just a human being, as just a piece of meat. Um, I mean, it's such a transformative experience. Love is, and what it does to you. You know, I mean, look, when you fall in love with something or someone, just the fantasy of being close to them, to their physical body, just the fantasy of holding their hand, the fantasy of kissing them, the fantasy of being intimate with them, they're all acts of worship. And what you're seeking really is union. And when the union isn't there, there is separation. And when there is separation, there is longing. And longing is like always in a state of prayer. And, you know, the world advertises itself to you, but it pales against the thing that you worship and you want closeness and intimacy with. And then tragedy happens. You know, you are close and you hold hands and you kiss and you are intimate. And then you're close more and you kiss more and you're intimate more. And you come upon the truth of the Buddha that whenever something repeats itself, eventually it sickens you and then you become indifferent towards it. And all of a sudden you realize as you experience the same thing over and over and over and over again, there is less thing to worship, less longing. In fact, you want the thing to not be around you as much. The magic disappears. And when the other person says, well, you want to like hold hands, you say, yuck. And all of a sudden, this human being who was like this temple that you long to go inside and you worship, you know, what lives inside this person, all of a sudden it becomes like another piece of meat. And you don't want to be around it. Everything about this person smells. So, I would say don't be in a rush to create obstacles, but that would be a foolish thing to say because life just creates obstacles without our consent. Whether you worship the right thing or the wrong thing, I don't really think it's that important. But I think it would be much to your benefit to worship someone like Socrates than, I don't know, Snoop Dogg. You know, sure, they both make you poets, they both make you very creative, but the outcome of worshipping someone like Snoop Dogg versus Socrates is vastly different. You know the story of Jonestown, right? That there's a group of people who love this man and they do anything that this man asks them. At a certain point, he tells them drink this liquid, and they do, and they all die. I suppose if my son was involved in such a cult, in such a group, as a father, I'd be very conflicted. Conflicted in the sense that someone has entered my son's life, and my son's life was going nowhere. He reads now, he worships now. He works without pay, the desire to be paid. His soul is involved in everything that he does, and it's a beautiful thing. That's something I've always longed for, something I experienced with Hussein for a decade or so. But as a practical man, I would also worry that, eventually he's going to see flaws. Eventually he's going to see contaminants in the group, in this person. And what if he comes to see them at the age of 35, 45, 50? What does he have at the age of 50? Nothing. Andrea, a friend of hers and mine, he moved from Italy to this particular place, Grass Valley. Someone told him something. He was inspired by the fourth way school or Gurdjieffian ideas. And he was there for 18 years. 18 years. He left at the age of 18 and he exited this cult almost when he was 40. At the age of 40. No degrees. No money. Nothing. If you're really, really mature and very cunning, you should study and study really, really well the tiny little saying of Jesus. Give to God what belongs to God, and give to Rome what belongs to Rome. You need to have two lives. And these two lives, lion and the lamb, in one sense, yes, they need to lay together. In another sense, they could never be intimate. Lion must always be a stranger to the lamb, and the lamb must always be a stranger to the lion. What you do in the world of God, or you can call it your creative world, it's you lock yourself in your study and you read and you write. And when your companion asks, what did you write? What were you doing in there? Say, oh, nothing, I was just taking a nap. Because if you were to tell him about your writings, about your readings, what is he going to understand? What sort of questions is he going to ask? Does he even have the capacity to understand if you were to be truthful with him? And the answer is no. He would have some assumptions, probably the wrong assumptions. Then it would end up in this huge disagreement, maybe a conflict. He's sleeping on the sofa and you sleeping in your car. It's no way to live life. So, but if you have found a world of God, if you have found a world in which you can be enormously creative, if it nourishes and elates you in some way. If you haven't found it, then no worries. But if you have found it, you should go visit the world of God, whatever that may mean for you, and make sure that the world of Caesar doesn't know anything about it. And when you're in the world of Caesar, behave in ways that Caesar likes. You should always tell God what you do in the world of Caesar, because God was once in Rome before he moved into the desert, before he became a monk, before he realized that Rome has nothing to offer him. The Buddha was once Siddhartha, filled with desires, parents, money, power, marriage, children, religion. He had all of those things. So the Buddha understands what it means to be a Siddhartha, but Siddhartha can never understand what it means to be the Buddha. Caesar is always going to create obstacles for the world of God. And the world of God is always going to create obstacles in the world of Caesar. Always. And you have to be profoundly cooked that you know when to keep your mouth shut, you know how much to reveal, how much to expose, and how much to keep hidden. There is this great story that comes from the Sufi tradition about this kid who goes to this teacher and says, I'm here to know the truth. And the teacher says, okay, fine. I'll take this pot to my student's house who's sick. Just don't open the lid. He says, okay. So this new kid who wants to be a disciple takes this pot and becomes curious. What's inside this pot? I feel something. I hear some noise. But there was a commandment given to him by the teacher. Don't open the lid. But curiosity, the world of Caesar. As Martin Luther would say, the whore of Athens. This desire to want to know everything. At some point, the kid can no longer contain himself, opens the lid, and this mouse jumps out. And, he goes back to the teacher kind of ashamedly, and the teacher says, why are you back? Did you give him the pot? I'm sorry, I became curious. I opened the lid and the mouse jumped out. So, can I go again? And the teacher looks at him and says, if you can't handle such a simple thing, and just taking this pot from point A to point B, how can I trust you with giving you the truth? All these experiences. So, I know I'm not really talking about your question.
it about our nature that makes us lose inspiration?
I don't know if there is only just one or two or three things that forces inspiration out. You know, it's a really, really interesting question, and I don't really know the answer except to kind of try responding to it in this way. I don't know why Rumi was inspired at the age of 37, 38 by Shams. You know, there is a story about the Sufi teacher Hassan al-Basri who goes to a kid who had a lit candle, and Hassan asks this kid, "Where did this light come from?" And the kid blows the candle out and looks at Hassan and says, "I will tell you where I got the light if you tell me where the light went." You know, there are lots of people who look at Shams, but they're not moved. They kind of see him as someone who's crazy, someone who's a brute, who doesn't know how to speak well, he's mean. But for Rumi, that wasn't the case. There was something about this man that inspired him. And that inspiration just wasn't for a day or two or three, you know. He even gave his, I think if I'm not mistaken, his stepdaughter to Shams to marry so that he could stick around some more, because he always threatened to leave, and Rumi couldn't stand to be without this man, you know. I don't know why he was inspired in such a way that he stopped talking to his disciples, where he stopped giving sermons. That he was willing to go to town and ask for wine and come back to his home at the busiest time of the day so everybody can see that he's actually carrying a jug of wine, so that Shams could know that Rumi has no ego left in him. There is no self in him, that he is like clay in the hands of Shams. When his disciples become so jealous of his relationship with this old man, Shams leaves. And Rumi falls into depression. It's like this light, it just goes away. How could this man create this light and his departure removes the light? And then he still doesn't want to talk to the disciples, because Rumi knows that it is because of them that this man left. He sends his kids, he sends his couple of faithful disciples to look for this man. And eventually Shams agrees to come back. And the moment he comes back, it's like inspiration comes back. He's full of life. He laughs. He dances. They spend time together. And then the disciples begin to become jealous again. And Shams looks at Rumi and says, if you don't do anything about this, I will leave. And if I leave, you will not find me again. But Rumi couldn't do much. And Shams leaves. When he leaves for the second time, Rumi gets depressed, but his depression has a sibling. And that sibling is inspiration. He writes about 700 poems dedicated to Shams. But the inspiration goes away again. He falls into depression. He doesn't write. He didn't like his second son, the youngest son. In fact, he hated him so much so that he didn't go to his wedding. And if I'm not mistaken, he didn't go to his funeral either. The inspiration of not going to your son's wedding, or the inspiration of not going to your son's, funeral. When he is inspired enough to write the first book of the Masnavi, inspiration goes away. He doesn't write. He doesn't talk. He gets really, really, really depressed. And he says, I want a physical human being to walk into my life where I can smell that Shams lives in him, or God lives in him, that life lives in this person. And there's a guy, he's uneducated, he doesn't know how to pronounce words the right way. But there is something about this man that brings life back to Rumi. And the way he starts his second book of Masnavi is, I had to wait and wait and wait and wait until a seed has been planted inside me, and this seed has grown and sprouted. And then this guy dies, and with his death, inspiration dies. And he waits and waits and waits for another person who has something inside him that can inspire Rumi. And that's an interesting phenomenon, in the sense that all of us want to be inspired from within. You want to sit and write, and you want to sit and have thoughts. And if anything about Rumi, that one should learn from is, despite all of his genius, he came to these dry spells in his life where nothing could inspire him. Not the Quran, not the memory of Shams, not his own poetry, not his own creativity. He needed another human being to walk into his life, to inspire him. You can call it grace, you can call it a blessing, you can call it a gift. I don't know what you can call it. Gurdjieff had said something interesting, that there is this force in life, and this force has only one function: to swallow you as a human being. It desires to make you its subject. to do its will. Life is ultimately there to put you to sleep, to remove inspiration, to remove creativity, to make you just a body without a soul. That's what life does. It puts you to sleep. I mean, she works 9 to 5 at some place. And once in a while, she says, I hate these people. Consider the amount of time she spent preparing for the ceremony. Consider the amount of time you spend, making sure your house is running smoothly. And in the end, you want to sit and read a good book. You want to sit and write a nice, creative paragraph. But there is no energy left to you. Life has taken everything, the obligations, the responsibilities. And the only way you could really overcome the obstacles created by life is if you have a death experience like a triple bypass, if all of a sudden you run into a teacher, if all of a sudden death inspires you to walk away from everything, something, that you kind of stand outside of life and you look at life and you ask yourself, well, what is really worth pursuing in life? And if the answer is nothing, hopefully there is a teacher of sorts. Maybe you have fallen in love with someone or something, when the semester begins, I plan to go to the office still at 4 in the morning. Get up at 4, get there by 4:20 or so. I hope to write. I also know the difficulties ahead. I'm not really inspired to write. I've been writing this piece on death for about, 6 months or so. It's a relatively nice piece. And I wake up every morning, and I work on it, but I'm not inspired. I'm dragging. It's tough work, and for any work to be valuable, you need to see yourself in it. I'm not intimate with the writing, but because there is a good 100 pages I wanted to finish, but it's not going to finish. And I think it's kind of like what Hafiz had said. You wake up every morning and you sit at your computer, and for 365 nights in a row or days in a row you sit and you just hit a brick wall. Nothing moves. But the 366th day, there's a crack and writing begins. The saying of Hafiz is, I get up and I pray. I pray every night, but my prayers are never answered. I hope that tonight when I wake to pray, that the arrow that has my prayer will hit the bullseye. It will go all the way to God's ears, and God will hear, and God will send one of his angels in a dream, and I will get a response, and that'll inspire me. And I suppose what I'm trying to say is, I don't know where inspiration comes from. I don't know how it fades. I don't know when it comes back, or how it can come back. All of us, the 4 of us in this room, we've been in relationships. We try to inspire romance with our companions. Out of the 10 outings, 20 outings, 100 outings, one comes very, very close to being an inspired night out. But it continues to miss. Once in a while you just get lucky, and I don't know how that happens. I'm not inspired to write, but I'm certainly inspired to go downstairs and build rooms under the deck. I put some breakers out, ran some wires, I have light everywhere. The difficulty though is this. If you understand inspiration and what it does to you, you should not care if it's the inspiration directed towards writing or digging a hole to plant something or moving compost or moving poop from point A to point B. Inspiration is inspiration. Conflict begins when you say, my writing is going to have more value than running wires under the brick. And the moment you do that, then that value judgment, is going to just mess up the fact that you woke up so early to go downstairs and to do some yard work. Because all of a sudden your rationality, your value system has made this particular inspiration irrelevant. It devalues it completely. I say I'm going to write so that my kids, once I die, hopefully, when they remember me, they say, oh, I had a father. Let me see what he wrote about death a little bit. If I can inject the same idea downstairs, that I'm building a room downstairs, I'm building a sauna, I'm building this, and I'm building that. Maybe once in a while, the way they're inspired to read a book, or to read something that I wrote, maybe they'll sit downstairs and they say, oh, my father 20 years ago, he built this room. It's really nice. But the answer to your question, I don't know. But I can tell you this. For a decade, the idea of going to Hussein's house was inspirational. It was filled with fear and confusion and joy and dread and anxiousness and fear. You had no idea if you were going to cry in front of other people, if you were going to scream, if it was going to embarrass you. You just had no idea what would happen, but you didn't care. I didn't care, Out of, I think, the 10 years of gatherings, maybe I was uninspired in maybe 4 or 5 of them. For 10 years, it was so full of life. And at a certain point, I looked at him and I felt nothing. And when he spoke, I would walk away because all I could see and I could hear were flaws in his thinking. And the way he would approach ideas, it was childish, it was scattered. And then I remember going to Moe's at Berkeley. Every Tuesday and Thursday, I would go there for, 5, 6 years. I would go to the 3rd floor, the section on Gurdjieff, the section on Sufism, the section on religion. I would look at books and I would look at the paragraph. I wanted to be touched by magic. I wanted one of these goddamn books to inspire me. Just something. I drove all the way from Roseville, and before heading to school, I would just stop, and I would save money because I was poor, I had no money. And I would steal money without my parents knowing, I would open boxes, grab some cash, um, there was no inspiration. And then one day, I went to Jacob Needleman's office, and he said something about Gurdjieff, and I had no idea what he was talking about. I didn't know who Gurdjieff was. I didn't know who Gurdjieff was, but he looks at me and says, "Have you ever heard of Gurdjieff?" I said, "No, I have no idea who Gurdjieff is." He looks at me kind of dumbfounded. He was very surprised. "You don't know who Gurdjieff is?" I said, "No, I don't know who he is." He says, "Well, if I was you, I would, after my class, go and get this book called In Search of the Miraculous." I said, "Okay, I'll go get the book." And I go to Moe's, and I found a used copy for $7. And I remember I went to a coffee shop, and it was an amazing book. An amazing, amazing, amazing book. And I looked to my right, and then I looked to my left, making sure that I am invisible. And so I bring the book up, I kiss the book, and I tap the book to my forehead, and I put it in my backpack, and I very, very quietly walk out. I was inspired by the book. I couldn't finish it. I haven't read it cover to cover, but there was something at that moment that was profoundly magical about the book. How did it happen? I don't really know. All I can say, if there is anything out there that has inspired you, whether it's cleaning the house, you wake up in the morning and you say, "Today, I just want to clean the house." You have been touched by something profound. Once it goes away, or once you're a little too casual with it, once it goes away, you will long to have it back, and it's not going to come back. Also, not all artists look for inspiration. Inspiration for the most part really is the domain of mostly introverts, mostly those who work with a good amount of emotions. If you are Leonardo da Vinci, if you're that type of an artist, you will yourself to create. If you're Vincent van Gogh, there is no will inside you. Inspiration comes when it wants to, and it leaves. And once it leaves, you feel orphaned, you feel deflated, you feel abandoned and lifeless. So, with this one here, as well as this one, it's like you wake up every morning to pray because there is something about your life that is in knots, and you want a prayer to come down, you want an answer to kind of resolve the situation. the world will crush them. And you say, well, maybe piano is their temple. Maybe it's dancing. Maybe it's Kumon. Maybe it's Legos. Maybe it's something that will dissuade them from watching TV. You know? And as a parent, you know this much better than I. You know? You come from a different culture. It's a sacred culture. It's very profound. It has depth. And tragically for you, that's where your foundation, your concrete, or your dough was made. Then you come here, you know, and you see the mess around you. And you say, okay, I want my kids to have something I had for the first 16, 17 years of my life. You know, and you give them music. You give them Shah Rukh Khan. You give them Amitabh Bachchan. You give them food that tastes like India. You know, you create these memories for them. And you hope that one of them clicks. And hopefully in the future, that memory will be a point of inspiration. Once in a while, I open Daughter of Fire, and I just glance through the pages. I'm looking for a paragraph, a line, a sentence that will inspire me. Not inspire me to continue reading the book, you know, so that I could close the book, have these ridiculous emotions consume me, go for a walk, become introverted, be unreachable, be in touch with something that I can't describe, look at my life and see it as a complete mess as well as a blessing, you know. And I guess if you have this longing about you that says, I want to be inspired by something, you know, it's kind of a feeling of homelessness to some extent. And it's tragic if you can't find a home. And you're very, very lucky if there is something out that can inspire you. I mean, Kamala Harris, when Joe Biden removed himself and she came in, man, that was an inspiration, you know. So some inspirations can last a minute, some a couple of decades. You're really, really lucky if you can find something that can inspire you for a long period of time. You know, it's like being on the stove, you know, and this heat just cooks you day after day after day after day. And a few years pass by and you realize everything about you has changed. You smell differently, you look different, you feel different. You know, so, I mean, it's great that someone as cheap and petty as Little Wayne or Eminem can, or One Direction can inspire you. But the way they inspire you is just so short-lived. You know, we had, when Helen was alive, she lives about 3 hours away from here, you know. So we decided, with Helen's permission, of course, to have a gathering at the pavilion. And there were people from here who drove all the way to Grass Valley. And like 3 or 4 of them would spend the night in one of Carolyn's room, all these smelly people, and they'd be fine. And I think the backdrop was that they were inspired. Sure, I don't really have much depth, but the very fact that they were willing to drive 3 hours there, have bad food, listen to someone talking about ridiculous things, and then 4 of them, occupying a single tiny room, and then getting up in the morning, having bad breakfast again, going back to the pavilion. These are things that really stay with you for a long, long time, especially things that have depth. So, short answer, I don't know. I don't know how inspiration comes about. I don't know why it ends. We put a lot of pressure on this one for good reasons. The instrument, the big black instrument out there, she's so good at it, really. And it inspires me, when she is not by the instrument, when they're not practicing, I feel as if it's being lost, it's being stolen by this stupidity of life, And it's such a devastating thing, because it's a gift that just goes into a black hole, and there comes a point where her life becomes so busy, like she won't have time for it. It's such a frightening thing to inspire anyone who has a life, and has a good life, a life that's going somewhere, or has direction of sorts. Because inspiration kills that life. It really does. If it's outside of that life, if you have a family life and it's a good life, and you have a job and it's a good job, and you enjoy the presence of, the people in your life, if you're inspired by Socrates, he will ruin you. Unless you can give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar and to God what belongs to God. But that's like 50 years down the road. And by the time you get to that mature place where you know what to give to Caesar, what to give to God, I don't think anyone has the stamina or the capacity to stick around until you reach that stage. So if you have a family life and you enjoy it, you should find inspiration within the context of just your family life. Don't try to look for inspiration that is on the outside and contradicts and creates conflicts. The problem with inspiration is it's very tempting. It's like the Garden of Eden story. There's a part of you that says no, there's another part of you that says yes, and with some encouragement, from this rebellious side of you that dislikes life and what life does to you, if that serpentine quality to you kind of just supports you even more, there's a good chance that inspiration will push you into expulsion. And once in a while you'll look up and you realize that, they're just not reachable anymore. And down here you have nothing except a very just tiny seed of inspiration whose future is uncertain. And then the conflict begins. Emerging viruses. It's a book that came out, I don't know, almost 30 years ago. I listened to this guy. He was on this radio show around midnight. And the things, he was a dentist, and his father was a dentist. And he was saying all these amazing things about government and politicians and money, and how viruses are created and pushed into people's lives. It was such a moment of inspiration for me that I couldn't sleep that night. And I went to Barnes & Noble or somewhere and got the book. But I'm glad that the inspiration was short-lived, because when you read this book and you say, maybe I should just end my life now. Sometimes it's just good for the inspirations to go away very, very quickly. Anyways, I'm sorry to keep. There are these scenes in Daughter of Fire where Baisad is just sitting, and Irina looks at him and says, I'm sorry, I don't want to bother you, but are you praying? And he says, pray to who? Pray what? And from one stance, it's such a profound thing to say, that I am the thing around which I revolve. From a different perspective, it's God doesn't inspire you. Quran doesn't inspire you. Your disciples don't inspire you. Nothing in life inspires you. What if you just wake up in a lousy mood where you're no longer the center? What inspires you? It's a very, very sad life for someone like him. Stacy, is there something you want to talk about?
I'm wondering if you could talk about either the nature of conflict, or the idea of do not store your treasures down here, and what is on the other end of that spectrum.
Right now, I am not in conflict with these two tiny little creatures here. Quiet, they're respectful, they're behaving like mini adults, so everything is fine. As they become a bit more casual, a bit more playful, and as they interrupt the flow of my thought, as they begin to impose themselves more and more into this space, new emotions are going to be inside me. And these are emotions I wouldn't like, because now I have to compete with them. I want to occupy the space. And I'm going to say to myself, well, how often do we really have gatherings? Not very often. How often do we get a chance to sit and talk? Not very often. How often do I give my time and my energy to these kids? All the time. And expectations come about. That after such a long time, we've invited some friends, we're sitting, we're talking. And once their noise, the volume goes up, and I begin to lose some control of the space, I will also lose control of some of my emotions. And then instead of focusing on our conversation, I will have to focus on how I can tame them. There will come a point where I have to choose either to walk away, walk into the bedroom, or raise my voice, reprimand them, and just kick them out. So, as long as your environment is suitable, towards the goal you're pursuing, there is no conflict. When there are forces that are opposing where you want to go, that's when conflict begins. Now, conflict can either be created by life, or it can be created by someone like Gurdjieff. You don't want life conflict. That's the stupidest way to live life. And because all of us are in life, there is no other way, at least for me to say it, but to say that most of the conflicts that we deal with, they're just childish, infantile, and just plainly stupid. And we occupy life. And we occupy life because there's a good part of us that's just stupid. That's what we need to survive. Okay. If you remove yourself from life and you put yourself in Gurdjieff's life, a school, what you have now is theory morphs into application. He pushes buttons on purpose. It's like all the things he used to do to Ouspensky. Or even there is this documentary on YouTube where he looks at this woman and says, I am leaving. Come to France, but come alone. And this woman has like 4 kids. She says, did he misspoke? Is he really saying that me as a mother should just abandon my kids and just go to France? And there comes a point where she makes a decision. She goes to France, but with her 4 kids. And Gurdjieff looks at her and says, good job. I'm glad that you came in with the 4 kids. When someone who's proficient at what they do. Now remember, you and I are lazy, we are complacent, we are egotistical, we are filled with assumptions. We think we know, but the truth is we only have a set of assumptions we're working with. If you're working with someone who actually knows how to push you, okay, how to push certain buttons and have you lash out and then come and give you a hug, okay, to tell you I did this on purpose so you can see A, B, C, D. You know, it's if you've seen Meetings with Remarkable Men, it's near the end of the movie where this old man looks at this young kid and says to him, the young kid being Gurdjieff, says to him, stay at this center, at this brotherhood, as long as you possibly can until certain forces are crystallized inside you. Okay? Once they're in there, solid, like callus on your fingers, okay, go into life. Life will have no power over you. You know, if I go into life with stage 4 cancer, I will have fun. Maybe 10 minutes in 24 hours. I will mostly be in pain. If Gurdjieff can be a cancer, all of his ideas, if these ideas can consume you, then you will know what to do with life's conflicts. First of all, once you graduate from Gurdjieff school, you're not going to occupy a lot of spaces in life. You will pick and choose, kind of like Irina Tweedy. When she returns to London, she doesn't want a big mansion, she doesn't want a big sofa, she doesn't want a big house. What she wants is a tiny space which mostly hosts people, where she can sit and she can talk. And she's not tempted by the ridiculous things that I am tempted by on a daily basis. She is solid. And she's solid because she worked with a solid man, you know. So if you walk into life, and all of us do initially for the longest time, you have no choice but to have a good amount of conflict inside you. You know. The other part of your question, do not store your treasures down here. It's not meant for us. It's really just meant for very, very special people, you know, like monks, who kind of, you know, imagine someone like the Buddha, who talks about how life begins, how it's lived, and how it ends, you know. You can't find this man committing to any relationships. It's not possible for him. He's not made for relationships, any kind of a relationship. I'm not just talking about romantic ones, any kind. Because he knows that when he spends too much time with anything, he will lose interest. He will become indifferent. This is a man who knows the past, the present, the future. And this is not a man you want to be with. So do not store your treasures down here. Our basic instinct is one of survival. Food, shelter, and clothing. These are the most profound treasures that we pursue, and we store, and we save, and we protect. You know. Then all the desires that live inside you and I, you know, even if those desires are good, What does time do to everything? I mean, forget human fallibility, that we just mess things up. Even if you were to keep something very, very clean, time will get them rusty. Time will destroy them. I suppose if you wanted to live that particular saying, do not store your treasures down here, you have to live a profoundly, intensely detached life. You're in life, but not of it. Some people, I suppose, can live like that. You know, it's near the end of Hermann Hesse's book Siddhartha, where there is this point where Siddhartha, the kid's name is also Siddhartha, the father Siddhartha, misses his son so much. You know, he badmouthed his father, saying, you know, what is your wisdom going to do for me? You're just a ridiculous man. I want to go back into life and have fun with life, which is the right of this kid. And he sits, Vasudev, the boatsman, looks at him and says, you know, don't do it. Your father couldn't give you wisdom. You pursued your heart's desire. Your kid has to do the same. But he just wakes up and he misses his son. And he gets on this boat. He's on the river. He's going to go across this river to look for his son. And all of a sudden, the river speaks to him. And he sees his past. He sees his relationship with his father. He sees all the parents and all the ways they have loved their kids and all the ways the kids have disappointed and betrayed and had to go their own way to learn a few lessons, where all the parents had to wait and wait and wait and wait for these kids to get some sense into the thick skull. And he smiles at the river, and I suppose the river smiles back, and he turns the boat around and he goes home. And for the first time he understands that all relationships are temporal, are temporary. It doesn't matter how much you love something, how much you love someone. It's just a matter of time. And if that's the case, when it's time for something to leave, let it leave. You know. You know, by nature, we are future oriented. You meet someone, you plan to get married to them. You plan to have children with them. You plan to buy a house with them. We all do it. You know, and should any of those plans not come true, well, we feel devastated. And if you were to live the saying, go into things, expect nothing. The other aspect of it is you see so much of yourself in the things you do, in the things you create. I am nothing without my job. I am nothing without this. I'm nothing without that. And if anything that you have interest in goes away, part of you shatters. And to some extent, the saying is, you can't store yourself in anything. Nothing can be a reflection of who and what you are. Nothing down here. Which is devastating. You know. The language that is used in the trilogy Conversation with God is so interesting. Whenever Neil Donald Walsh says, well, my son did A, B, C, D. God says, you who happen to play the role of a father in this life, and some people may call it semantics, and it may be, but it's a play with words, and it's such an interesting way to deal with the sort of treasures we store down here, that I inject a good amount of hope and fantasy and fear in my kid, and you live your life through your kid. And the saying is, you're an empty vessel. You'll always be an empty vessel. Keep yourself an empty vessel. Attach yourself to nothing. Some people are poor and they demonize money because they never had it and they don't have the creativity to make money. So they always say money is bad. Some people are rich and they do a lot of things with their money only to realize it's hollow and they walk away from it. Not storing your treasures down here is be like Siddhartha, have good parents, have money, allow your parents to create a fantasy of a kingdom for you, that you will go to school, they will buy you a house, a car, they will find you a companion, they'll do all sorts of things for you. Get married, have children, have a job, have a savings, buy a house, buy a car. And hopefully you'll be lucky enough before you die, you will look yourself in the mirror and all the things you have and you feel nothing about them. And by this time you will have no fear of being homeless. You will have no fear of having no money. At that stage, you will not store any treasures down here, But it's a very advanced saying by someone really who never desired anything that most of us desire. I think it's a wonderful saying. It's just said by the wrong person. The saying should have been spoken by someone like the Buddha, or Moses, not someone like Jesus. Jesus never was married, so he doesn't really understand attachment. He doesn't understand love. He doesn't understand commitment. He doesn't understand the fear of walking away, abandoning your kids. The Buddha understood all of those things. Have you read Siddhartha? You will soon, one day we will. There is a scene in the book where he says, everything lied, everything stank. All moments of inspiration are a lie. All the things you desire are a lie. And if you pay close attention, you begin to smell them, the foul smell. In many ways, Hussein was a really, really bad teacher. he was either he was trying to protect us, and that protection made him dishonest in a protective way, or he just wasn't paying attention. And so he inspired us towards things that we shouldn't have been inspired. Yes.
How do you be good at something? How do you be good at something? But like what thing?
How do you become good at something? Well, imagine you go to the kitchen and you open the freezer and you get out this box called box of chocolate ice cream or vanilla.
Yeah.
Okay, marshmallow ice cream.
Yeah.
And you put some in a cup and you put some in your mouth and you say, wow, this is beautiful. And then you go to your mom and you say, Mom, how can I make this ice cream? Well, why do you want to make it? Because you want to make it because you tasted some and you liked it. So before you can become good at anything, first you must have tasted it. And that taste says, I like it very much.
So
Then
if you like cheese, you just make cheese.
yeah, and then you go to your mom and say, how do I make cheese or ice cream? And then your mom opens the fridge and says, well, okay, let's ask Siri. Siri, how do you make ice cream? You need cream, you need milk, you need this, you need that. And then your mom says, Sophia, let's get in the car and go to Safeway.
Oh,
Why, you ask? It's so cold out. Well, you like ice cream, no? Yeah. Well, you want to make ice cream, no? Yeah. Well, we don't have any of the ingredients. Let's go to Safeway and buy them. I said, but it's so cold. The house is nice and warm. I said, well, how much do you really like the ice cream?
a little.
If you say a little, then you're probably not going to go to Safeway. If you say, Mom, I really, really like it, and I really, really want to make it, then you go to Safeway. And then while you're driving, you say to your mom, well, can we make it now? Your mom says, well, no, we can't make ice cream if we don't have the stuff for it. So for the next 5 weeks, from Safeway you go to Lucky's, from Lucky's you go to Costco, from Costco you go to Target,
Why would
and then
you
you come home with 20 bags of stuff.
Why would you need 20 bags of stuff?
Because it's ice cream.
Why not just get ice cream?
Because she wants to make ice cream.
So?
And so you have never made ice cream, and your mom says, and you say, okay, Mom, can I open the boxes? And your mom says, no, let's look for a recipe. And she says to you, okay, ask Alexa for a recipe for vanilla ice cream. So you say, Alexa, vanilla ice cream, recipe. Okay? And then you say, Mom, well, can we print this out? And Mom says, yeah. And you say, Mom, but I don't know how to read. Oh, okay. Then you have to spend 2 years learning the alphabets and how to read. And then you do. Remember, all you want to do was to make ice cream.
Wait.
But now you have to read.
You gotta wait 2 years.
Yep. That's how long it takes to read.
Everything just get expired and rot?
Yeah, everything would probably rot. And
And
then,
marshmallow ice cream doesn't even sound good.
that's true. And then now you know how to read. And then you open the boxes and you mix everything together. And your mom says, no, that's not the way you do it. First we have to melt the butter.
Wait.
You have to go through steps. Steps? Yeah.
What?
And so
Yeah.
after having gone through all the steps, you put this liquid in the freezer, you wait and wait and
At
wait.
least for 24 hours.
That's right. And then you take it out and you put some in your mouth. And you say, yuck!
And then you
It
go.
tastes awful.
Bleh.
And your mom looks at you and says, yeah, honey, you know, the first time you make something, it's not going to come out right.
Yeah, because.
But if you really, really are interested and if you really like it, you get in the car again. You go to Safeway, you buy the stuff, and you repeat again and again and again and again until
you like it.
yes. And then you become really, really good.
Wait, why not use the stuff?
Hmm?
Why would they have to go again? Why not just use the old stuff?
We can use the old stuff if they haven't gone bad.
But doesn't ingredients don't go like good, expired, good, expired, good, expired?
Yep.
That doesn't make any sense though.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense, Baba. Do you know how you guys became so good at walking?
I don't know.
Yeah. You know how many times?
Every 2 seconds.
Yep. Stacy had to carry you guys so many times because you would fall.
My head was so heavy I couldn't even lift it.
Yep, it still is, Baba.
What?
It's just practice, Sophia. Lots of practice, Baba.
2 years of it. What?
They interviewed Alan Watts' son some years ago. He had some nice things to say about his father, Alan Watts. But he also had some awful things to say about his father. I think Alan Watts married 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times.
Who?
Alan Watts for
Why
some.
would he do that 7 times?
He was just very hungry.
Hunger for what?
He married his wife, the same wife, 7 times.
Why?
Yep. Alan Watts was so much into, Taoism and Buddhism and just trying to figure out life. That he never paid attention to his own life. He didn't much care for it. He wasn't that interested. The bigger life was always more interesting to him. He was always absent in many ways. We had a guy in Iran, his name was Ali Shariati. He had his PhD in sociology from Sorbonne in France. And then a lot of people argue that he was one of the main causes for the Iranian Revolution in 1979. In one of his last talks before he was exiled, he was giving a talk in Masjid Irshad. It was a building that was just made for him. And he was very charismatic. You know, a chain smoker throughout his talk. He apologized to his family. He apologized to his wife. He apologized to his kids, to his, I think, son and 2 daughters. That he was never there. That he was much more intimate with ideas, with justice, with, you know, these concepts, than he was with his living, quacking, you know, family. And I think it's interesting in the sense that you should go into a relationship, but know full well that you're only going to be there 20%. And you want to be in one for political reasons. That there are going to be these moments where your skin needs to be touched by someone. Sometimes you have this desire to sit and watch a movie with someone, to have a conversation with someone, you know. And know at the end that you will disappoint them. You know. So.
Good night, Sophia. Have sweet dreams. Thank you, Sarah. Good night, Sophia.
کتابارم ببر بابا.
Good night.
شب بخیر بابا.
Good night.
Night.
You know, Murtaza wanted to throw that painting away when they moved into their house.